What I was running from was the life I was living. What I was running from was the results I was getting. I didn't want to feel depressed anymore. I didn't want to feel despair anymore. I didn't want to feel anger anymore. I didn't want to feel frustration anymore. I wanted to feel happy. It wasn't my circumstance that made me unhappy. It wasn't my circumstance that made me angry. It was what I did with it, how I handled it, what my perspective was about it. And so until I shifted my perspective, nothing was going to change. And I realized at that point, when I had seen all of that, I was unhappy from what was inside, not my environment outside.
Wow. Ready? Ready to rock and roll? Is that action? All right. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Absolutely. Go. 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 Go.
Hello, everybody. It's Jason Will with
Go. Go. Go.
This is a real estate podcast, but we talk about leadership, personal growth, and becoming the best version of yourself. Leadership, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Growth, best version of yourself.
Go. Go.
So this is a real estate podcast. Welcome to the Impact Agent Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Will. As always, I want to remind you this podcast is powered by JPAR Coastal County. That's JP and Associates Realtors. If you're interested in a career with JPAR Coastal County, please feel free to call or text me 251-583-9728. I am joined today. I've got a very special guest. We're not in studio. We're actually in a hallway of a hotel where Chris Sears, who is about to come on mic, presented it was a 3-hour workshop this morning.
3 hours, yep, that's it.
So if you had to, I know it was several different topics, but if you had to consolidate it into one theme, I would think it was just how to create or build transformation in your life. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yeah, transformative habits in your life.
Transformative habits in your life. So let's set the stage for folks, because this is a real estate podcast, but I really do not want to talk about real estate today. I wanted to talk more about where you closed, and it was more of a testimony. You talked about a really bad season in your life, but coming through that and falling in love with God. So I want to talk about that most of all. But I think some people are really interested in, your credibility as a salesperson, what have you. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay, sure. I've been in the real estate business for 24 years. I've overseen close to 70,000 transactions in my career, and done well over $10 billion in commercial real estate as well, and trained thousands of agents in the past, but built teams as well as run the top brokerage in Houston. I most recently built one up to the fourth largest in Houston, had about 1,200 agents, and we did 9,000 transactions last year.
Wow.
So I would say have made it somewhat in this business.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Yeah, so you've made it. But your life started out on a very different track.
That's right.
And so it's like a big blessing to hear like you're this super successful guy. And really, in a lot of ways, your success is just getting started, you could say. I mean, there's plenty more chapters to unfold here. You look at it and go, gosh, when I heard your story this morning, I thought it could have ended very differently than it did. It could have gone a much different direction. And you talked about one of your friends who was on that journey with you in that season who just got out of prison not too long ago.
That's correct.
So that could have been your reality. So would you be so bold as to unpack this for our audience and just tell people what was your childhood like, and let's just kind of build from there.
Sure. So I'll tell your listeners, like I told everybody in the meeting this morning, I grew up in a house where drugs were flowing all the time, and you can call it a drug house. I mean, my dad sold drugs, and my mom and dad both did drugs and had drug parties all the time. I'm the oldest of three. My little brother is 20 months younger than me. Well, this is the kind of environment it was. First time I got knocked unconscious by a grown man other than my father, I was 5. And that was at a drug party, and a guy was trying to suffocate my little brother with a pillow, just for fun. My little brother was 3. And so I attacked the guy, grown man, and he knocked me out. And when I woke, all I could think about was my brother. I ran down the hall, and guess what? He was asleep in bed. So I felt a tremendous sense of relief. I fell asleep, woke up the next day, and what I really realized was nobody's going to protect me and my siblings. I've got to be a protector. And so I started out making the decision to protect my little brother and sister. But what that turned into was anger and resentment and rage even. So by the time I was 13, I was a gang leader. And by the time I was 15, I was running drugs through high schools, middle schools. 16, started running drugs through my first nightclub. And by 17, I had overdosed on cocaine 3 times.
Where were your parents at this point?
At home.
Just still doing their thing? And
yeah. And interestingly enough, we lived in an environment where my dad was actually an engineer. And so he traveled a lot in the oil business while doing all of these things. So me not understanding why he was doing those things when he could be doing something else to take care of the family is really was the seed of a lot of my rage. Mm-hmm. I was angry at my dad, but then I took it out on the world around me and on myself. And, that was really tough to come to that realization. It took years and years and years to understand myself in hindsight. What that also did for me, living in that environment, it made me realize that in business, I'm still going to have breath in my lungs if I fail. If I mess up, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's not a matter of life and death. It's not a matter of survival. It's a matter of thriving. And so that helped me to understand where to put fear in check in my life. I consider that a great blessing. But that being said, at 17 years old, going back, there were a couple of turning points for me in my life. One was when I got arrested at 17 and had to spend time in jail. And all I could do was think. And every minute seems like an hour when you're sitting in jail, by the way. And while I was there, a couple of things happened. One of the people who was most influential in my life was my first love, right? First girlfriend that I really felt like I loved. Well, she was like, I'm out. You're going to jail. You're no good. I'm done with you. I love you, but I can't be around this. And then my brother got expelled from school with some drugs that I'd given him to sell to somebody, all while I was sitting in jail for that couple of weeks. And so those things contributed to me coming out and going, you know what? I'm done. I'm done with gang life. I'm done with destroying people. I'm done. And so at 17, I decided to shift. Between my 17th birthday and my 21st birthday was several layers of coming to the place where I was just tired of destroying me. So I pulled back from being violent with other people, but I still had a bunch of self-loathing going on. And so I was still headlong into addiction and doing all this stuff. And one day I'd been partying with my friends and my brother. We ended up back at my dad's house. And by this time, me and my brother had lived together by ourselves since my 18th birthday. And now I was 20. And we ended up back at my dad's house partying. I smoked a bunch of marijuana, did some cocaine, and drank a 12-pack of beer that night.
Wow.
And I woke up to a knock on the door at my dad's apartment. Our friends were, scattered out on the floor in the living room. I was laying on the couch, and nobody would answer the door. So I got up to answer the door, and there was a guy standing there who could barely speak English. And he basically poured his heart out to me. He completely just poured his heart out to me right there. And he handed me this little piece of paper. It was for a men's home, a Christian home for men to get off drugs and alcohol. And he was going door to door, raising money for his stay there. He had been there for 30 days. With his broken English, he could barely get this out to me. And I'm sitting there listening, and he starts crying, pouring himself out to me. And he's like, look, I don't have anything. He goes, just if you're not going to take my words, take something I have. And he's reaching around in his pockets, and he pulls out a little pack of Wrigley spearmint gum, and he only had one piece left in it. It was one of those little 25-cent packs of gum. And he goes, "Here, this is all I have besides my heart that I'm giving you." And I'm kind of like a little blown away and starting to get choked up, right? And in that moment, one of my friends laying on the floor is like, "Hey man, tell this guy to get the F out of here. I'm trying to sleep." And that moment, all of a sudden, clicked in my brain. Here it is, this guy that I have decided to make my friend is the type of person I'm surrounding myself with, and he doesn't know the guy at the door from Adam, and he's cussing the guy at the door. And the guy at the door doesn't know me from Adam and is pouring his heart out to me so that I would listen to understand what his version of life truly could be. He was coming from a place of love and contribution into my life. And I looked at that stark contrast, and I went over and I kicked my friend on the floor and I said, "You shut up." And he's like, "Hey man, you don't have to do that." I'm like, "Just be quiet. Go to sleep." And I went back to the door and I took all the money out of my pockets and I gave it to that guy. And I said, "God bless you." And he shut the door and he left. The next day I went to church. And from there, I made the decision after church that day that I was going to study. And I studied every day from that point forward. But interestingly enough, I went to buy my first Bible after church that day. Went to Barnes & Noble. And I'm walking out of the Bible section. There's an escalator to go down to pay. And I come face to face with a guy. He goes, "Chris Sears, what are you doing here? What's that in your hand?" Now, the significance of that is I'm staring at my old cocaine supplier.
Wow.
We met at the top of the escalator with a Bible in my hand. And he's like, "You? Pff, yeah, whatever." He laughs. I said, "Yeah, I'm going to start." He goes, "Good luck with that." So I went down the escalator, bought my first Bible, and I started studying that night and realized to some extent God's plan for my life, but really understanding the love that is there. I mean, he's the God of love. And I learned that for the first time that day. So that was the major hit. So from there, that night I studied the Bible, and the next day I decided to quit everything cold turkey. I quit drinking, I quit smoking, I quit cocaine. I left everything. I went to my friends and I said, "You're not going to see me around for a while." And they're like, "Why?" I said, "I'm not going to be a part of this environment anymore." I said, "If you want to come with me, please come with me." And that was the hardest thing for me to do. And I turned and started living a different life.
To leave your friends behind, or?
Yeah, to leave my friends behind was the toughest thing.
Now, had you ever blessed anybody until that day? Like said, "God bless you" to someone before?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I guess you probably didn't even really know why you were saying it.
I had no idea.
But you'd never seen somebody show that kind of emotion or that kind of, was it him showing love to a complete stranger that you think just bowled you over?
It was that combined with me seeing the stark contrast and waking me up to what I'd surrounded myself with.
Yeah. Who was
all in 1 second. Yeah, I think it was like a ton of bricks moment for me.
Yeah. Proximity is power. I heard that recently, and who we surround ourselves with is who we become. But I mean, in a lot of ways, you were the ringleader of that situation, were you not? We didn't paint this picture all that deeply, but you were an incredibly violent person, carjacking people, and so
that's correct.
You could have ended someone's life or had your life ended. I mean, there was a lot of guns, a lot of violence, a lot of drugs, and that's a powder keg combination or trifecta there. So, there's a heck of a lot of grace in this path that you're on now. So, and it's interesting to me that you really started this journey. It was kind of a self-education journey. Did you have any mentors in those early years of Christianity that kind of helped you with this path?
Oh, yeah. I got plugged into a church that had a great singles ministry, and the guys who studied the Bible with me were really solid, and they supported me on a day-to-day basis, every single day. I got so involved. I led several of the ministries, whether it be the arts ministry, children's ministry, singles ministry at one time, We had a ministry that was dual income, no kids ministry. Led that for a while. Because I really felt like the guys who had influenced me showed me the way to be able to love others and influence them for God. And I went headlong into it. I loved it. So yeah, those early guys really shaped me with their influence.
Did you see, was it a very quick release to the anger? Because what you were fueled by was anger. It wasn't belief or faith. That's what had fueled you in the early years of your life. Do you feel like God just took that anger out of you at one fell swoop, or did it slowly leave?
No, funny. That's a great question. Funny enough, in hindsight, God transmuted the energy, turned it to passion for love, passion for excellence, passion for doing the things it takes to build myself up instead of tear myself down. God flipped it on its head. Now, that being said, are there trigger moments? Absolutely. Could I turn on a dime? Yeah, for a long, long time. And still, to this day, I can go from being extremely joyful to being frustrated and angry and come down real fast back to joyful based on me knowing myself enough now. Those trigger moments are still there. We're humans. Right?
Yeah.
We're men. But in the end, it's recognizing yourself and understanding and being willing to not just let it take you, right? I think that there's wise man once said, take captive every thought and make it obedient, right? That's what I've practiced over the last 24, 25 years of being a Christian. But no, it didn't all happen at once.
Well, I want to try to give people a roadmap for how you were able to do, like the steps you actually took. So you didn't leave your city, but you're living in a very large city, fourth largest in the nation. So you just moved. Did you move to a different part of the city? So your brothers are still in dysfunctional activity. Your parents are still dysfunctional.
No, actually, my parents are both gone now.
Oh, they are.
Yep.
But at this time, when you started this walk in Christianity.
So here's what happened. I hitchhiked across the United States running for myself. I found I showed up everywhere I went. So I came back to Houston. When I came back to Houston, guess what? My brother had gotten evicted from our apartment. He was now living with my cousin, and I had no place to live. My dad was living in New Mexico. My mom was living with my sister. And so I went, knocked on my grandparents' door, and I knew they had a garage apartment. So I asked them if I could lease the garage apartment from them. They took me in and they showed me boundaries for the first time in my life ever at 19 years old. They showed me boundaries and love. My grandfather told me that there's only two things you can't do. Come home past midnight and come home high or drunk. That's it. That's all I ask. It's my house.
Yeah.
Right?
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, right? So they taught me to balance a checkbook. They taught me that I was worth going and getting a job, that I needed to get enrolled in school to make something of myself. So they helped me do all of that. And that started changing my outlook. Now, I was still going out. This is before I became a Christian. Mm-hmm. This was the year leading up to me having this. I started seeing boundaries in my life. I started seeing love. And I started seeing these people who didn't have to do this for me, but they did. And that started softening my heart, getting it ready. So removing myself from my circle of friends, it was simply not showing up at their places anymore. It was simply, let me go do something else and let me surround myself with some new friends. And I poured myself into the church friends, the friends who were doing singles ministry work, the friends who were going out and volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, the friends that were doing all the really good things to build up the community around them. And that's who I started surrounding myself with. And I started learning from them.
Did you think, gosh, this feels so much better than getting high and drunk and
all day long,
hurting people? Like, this is so much more fulfilling than the life I was leading. And so
that's correct. And it was so interesting because, people were like, you're going to quit all that stuff cold turkey? You're quitting coke, you're quitting marijuana, you're quitting alcohol. As much as you've done, you're going to have all these withdrawals. How are you going to do that? I didn't have any. I had none. The biggest challenge was leaving my friends behind. That tore my heart up. These are kids I grew up with. We've been through a lot together.
Right.
It's funny though. Once I said that and I made that commitment, I went headlong into it. Guess what my dad did? He called me up. He's like, hey, you're at this new apartment complex. I'm going to come move in that complex. He moved back from New Mexico, moved into my apartment complex, and he watched me for about 6 months. Saw me almost every day. And he was still doing all the stuff he was doing. On Father's Day that year, he comes to me after Father's Day lunch. It was a tradition. My grandfather, my dad, me, my brothers and sisters, we go to lunch on Father's Day. Well, he lives in the same complex. He's like, can you come back to my apartment? Go back to his apartment. And he starts crying and he falls on his knees in front of me. And he says, I want to know God like you do. And he starts crying. I just sat there and I held my dad for a little bit. And I was like, okay, you sure? He's like, yes, I do. So then I got a group of guys together from that day. And for 3 months, we studied with my dad. And I got to baptize my dad on August 22nd, 1999, right before my son was born.
Wow.
And that was pretty awesome. My dad quit relying on substances and the whole bit. So that started a whole new journey for he and I. And then when he had a stroke 5 years ago, I became his caregiver until he passed. And then my mom had a stroke 2 years later to the day, almost. And became her caregiver. And then I was able to, she moved into my house with my wife and kids, and we made my daughter's room my mom's room and moved my daughter into my office and moved my office out. And then 2 weeks after my mom moved into my house, I hadn't seen my mom in 10 years, mind you, because she had so much guilt about our childhood. She isolated herself. But when she had a stroke, she had no choice. Mm-hmm. She couldn't take care of herself anymore. She couldn't even dress herself. So after 2 weeks of living with us, I come home one day, and this was in 2016. And she goes, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah. So we go in my office, and she starts crying. She goes, what is this love that's here? I don't understand it. I've never experienced love like this. And of course, I started crying. Mm-hmm. And I said, Mom, you're a part of this. I said, this is coming back. It all started with you. You're my mom. And I was able to share with her my relationship with God and what the God of love had taught me about transforming from the inside out. First, with loving yourself enough to know you're worthy of it. Mm-hmm. The day she died in my house, she knew God.
That's amazing.
I got to baptize her in my pool. She came into my house deathly afraid of what was on the other side. She breathed her last breath, smiling, knowing where she was going.
I was really hoping this was going to have a happy ending, because I just know that it could. A lot of these cases, it could go the other way, but this is an amazing end to the story. So, but I'm scared to ask. So how are the brothers doing? I mean,
So my brother, he's doing fine. Just fine. My sister and I, we were at odds all growing up because we're both stubborn. Mm-hmm. We're both the same. And we have our opinions. Now we have a wonderful, wonderful relationship. Both of them have great families. Both of them have phenomenal kids. It's turned out pretty darn good. We all are very close. Very, very close. I can't tell you how wonderfully blessed I feel for living the life I've lived up to this point and having the family that I have, including my brother, my sister, and their kids. It's been amazing.
You said something, during your talk this morning to our agents, and then you said it again in the podcast when you said you went on this cross-country adventure. You said, like, wherever you were, or you kept showing up wherever you were. Say that again for me.
So I was running away from myself, and I kept showing up everywhere I was.
What does that mean? Unpack that for me.
Well, I didn't know what it meant, but I do now. So what I was running from was the life I was living. What I was running from was the results I was getting. What I was running from was feeling, I didn't want to feel depressed anymore. I didn't want to feel despair anymore. I didn't want to feel anger anymore. I didn't want to feel frustration anymore. I wanted to feel happy. I wanted to feel joyful. But what was happening was everywhere I went, those things were still there. And the reason those things were still there is because they were inside of me. They didn't follow me from an external source. It wasn't my circumstance that made me unhappy. It wasn't my circumstance that made me angry. It was what I did with it, how I handled it, what my perspective was about it. And so until I shifted my perspective, nothing was going to change. It didn't matter if I was here in Arizona, in the mountains. And by the way, there's some beautiful places in Arizona in the mountains, in Southern California, in the LA area, in Santa Barbara, in Northern California, getting up on Mount Diablo, looking down at the bay. It didn't matter where I was. I've seen some of the most beautiful places. I still kept showing up as angry, frustrated, depressed, and in a fog. And I realized at that point, when I had seen all of that it was from, I was unhappy from what was inside, not my environment outside.
Wow. Well, I hate to cut this short, but I got to run back in there and moderate this event. But Chris Sears, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. It was an intensely personal story, and I just feel blessed that our audience got to share it. Thank you
so much.
Thanks for listening to the Impact Agent Podcast. If you liked the show and got something out of it, please like the Impact Agent Podcast on Facebook and rate and review the show on iTunes or anywhere you listen to podcasts. This really helps us grow the show and helps other agents find it. Please share it with your friends and coworkers as well. Want us to deliver the show to you via email every week? Then email me at jason@impactagentuniversity.com and we'll send you the show every week. Please let us know what you think about the show, what you like, what you don't, or possibly make a suggestion about a topic you want to hear. Email me at jason@impactagentuniversity.com or leave us a message on Facebook at Impact Agent Podcast. This podcast is produced by Johnny Gwynn at Deep Fried Studios in Mobile, Alabama, and is paid for and powered by JPAR Coastal County. That's JP and Associates Realtors. Until next week, everybody be productive, safe, and happy, and always keep learning.